So I'm delighted to be here, particularly because I had an anxiety dream in which I arrived late and missing some important pieces of clothing. So I'm delighted to be here both on time and clothed. You probably are also, that I have managed that. So I am absolutely delighted to talk a bit about Women for Indy's lessons from prior to the referendum vote and more interestingly, I think, post. I would say that much of what I'm going to say matches the messages that you've already heard. I think they nicked my slides, but which is good. We're not hearing a lot of disagreement. I suppose one of the things that I would say is that one of the lessons from experience that we've had is there is no right answer. We did some things very, very well. We need to continue to do those. We need to change some of the things we didn't do so well. But for some voters, one thing will be right, and for other voters, perhaps another. And of course, no surprise, given that I'm speaking on behalf of Women for Indy, I think our assertion is that a large portion of the population that perhaps didn't get messages that were particularly helpful were women. And yet, they voted in almost as high a percentage as men for yes. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that the difference between male voters and female voters was not massive. So, the first thing I want to say is that when we talk about voters or even community, we need to not think of women as a special interest group, which is sadly the way they have often been treated. And if you look at this part of the program, for instance, we have women, and then we have young people, and we have pensioners, and we have working class people. None of them are obviously women. I think if I can get one thing across, it's that when we talk about any group in Scotland, we need to understand that gender matters. It doesn't trump always. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to use that word. But what it does do is it's relevant, okay? So when we're talking about young voters, we need to remember that half of the potential young voters are young women, and that their lives are very different from young men's. It doesn't mean that necessarily they're going to identify with different interests in mind or that they want different things. But what is really important is that the context around which they see alternatives and they hear messages will always be very different. The same for older women, the same for women in multiple different economic situations. And I'll just tell you a quick story, which is that it was very interesting during the referendum campaign, the previous one, that there was a number of times during the campaign when Women for Indy was getting messages from other yes campaigns saying, well, will you take care of the women? And then we'll do the rest of the important population. That is not unusual in our world, and we want it to be less usual in our world. And we would like you all to start hearing those same things and challenging them in your communities and in your organizations. So the principles we want to embed is that women are not a homogeneous group. Scotland is filled with lots of them, however, about 52%. And they are disproportionately poor. They are disproportionately powerless. You know, the phrase that I use all the time is, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. I nicked that from somebody in New York. And that we are disproportionately likely to be victims of violence in our personal lives. Those are always realities, and they are true for almost all women. So what does that mean from our perspective? Well, we said, well, let's think about going out and talking to some of the women we know, and especially getting out of our bubble, I think, which was the challenge for all of us in the campaign after the vote, and finding out what would make a difference. So we asked women, a few women, and this is a bit of qualitative research, not, I have to confess, on the scale of Ian Black's research, but we consider this a process rather than, I think, a one-off piece of research. So Women for Indy has been listening for a long time, and we ask questions about different things. And in this one, we asked people, we asked women who voted no, Remain mostly, why they voted no, why they voted Remain, and what would help them vote yes. So we don't have any conclusions. We're not going to say you must do this or women think this, but just for some interesting thoughts about how we message, it's important to understand that we think that the Brexit vote may have weakened the argument that was often made in the last campaign about the important solidarity links between working classes across the UK. We think that the women that we talked to, for whom the no vote was based on a sense of identity around being British, that we didn't see a lot of prospect for them changing their minds. There wasn't really anything that we could say to them or that they could say to us about what would bring them to a yes vote. No surprise, if anybody has ever read Carol Gilligan, that tells you how old I am. She's an old sociologist, probably dead now. But she talks about the importance of connection for women, and that was absolutely a clear message from the women that we talked to, the connection and solidarity, not just with other women, but with other people in their communities and across the UK, is important to them, and we need to think about how we message if we want our messages to resonate. We found that, not too surprisingly, women were also concerned about the economy and not, I would say, quite as interested in questions of the North Sea oil or the currency issues, but they wanted to know, as Robin was saying, that somebody had a plan and that there was some sensible way not to be afraid about what the options might be. Interestingly, and also this came out of Ailsa Henderson's research about the no voters, women were no more likely to vote out of a sense of risk aversion than men, the no voters, which I think sort of counters some of the sort of gender stereotyped, oh, women were really fearful. I mean, I think we're all really fearful about what's going to happen with the economy as a consequence of Brexit, and we need to be reflective about what that means for our messaging. But can we put in the bin this idea that women are just feared and old and, notice my Scottish there? And hold up, going la, 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 la. And I think this is very similar to the previous messages, that the women we talk to want to believe in the Scotland that many of us see and almost can touch and feel. They want to believe in it, they want to be part of it, but they don't want to be fooled. And they don't want to be sold a bill of goods that are going to then go away like so many campaign promises in their lives. And it is a bit about making them feel that not only are they part of the change, but that the change is lasting and not a promise. So what would convince? I think the first thing that we found is we asked women what would make you believe that women's equality might be actually part of a new Scotland. And they said, well, the first thing would be a woman in the Yes campaign, heading up the Yes campaign, or fewer shouty men, women, 100% of the women that we talked to were like, can we move away from this meh, no, meh, debate, fight, who scored the most points, now we all go home and watch Scotland lose at football. I'm sorry, this is not winning over voters, as we all know, and it turned women away from the referendum campaign in droves. No manners. If women aren't seen as part of the change of Scotland, if they do not see themselves there on the television, on the stage, in the audience, being picked when they're asking questions, at the stalls, in your communities, then they don't believe that we want them as part of the new Scotland. And finally, again echoing a previous issue, reaching across and finding collaborative and community-focused messages rather than the party political arguments that we're all so used to. So we have a couple of lessons. If you've heard the phrase listening exercise, that was nicked from us. We did it a long time ago. First. So listen first. Talk about things that matter to women and to everybody. So far, Women for India has been doing national councils all around Scotland. Hundreds of women have attended over the last year and a half. They want to talk about food. They want to talk about rights and justice. They want to talk about health and well-being. And in January, we'll be talking about the economy. These are the things that matter to women and to men, I think, and to young people and old people, to working class people and to more prosperous people. Let's talk about those things and make a plan. And finally, let's do politics differently. As Audrey said, let's be the change we want to see. Thank you very much.